Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to LeTip Live. LeTip is a networking organization with individuals who are like-minded to help each other's businesses grow and to learn and to help each other, provide each other with useful information. So we have a very special episode for you today because we have Joel Kisner of Pinnacle Consultants and Advisors who are going to bring some useful information to help you in preventing pandemic fraud. So without any further ado, I want to bring you guys Joel Kisner. Hey, Joel, how are you?
I'm doing good. Nice to meet you, Doug.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you for joining us on this LeTip Live. We have a jam-packed episode for you guys at home today. A lot of useful information. But before we dive in, I definitely want to introduce you to our viewers at home and give them a taste about you and what you're all about. And I also want to remind you guys that we are live. So if you ever have a question, comment, or concern, you could put it in the comments section and we can answer live with you today. So Joel, give us a little background about who you are and what you do.
Okay, so I was a police officer for roughly about over 25 years in California and Nevada. I worked local cases, state cases. I was on a federal task force for 5 years, computer forensics, child exploitation, handled some international case that was a lot of fun, worked in DC for a while. And as I ended up my career the last 10 years, I was in homicide, which taught me a lot about organizing different components of an investigation, different components of a project to try and get things to come together. And that was very helpful. My entire law enforcement career taught me a lot about just understanding mechanisms and digging down to the root cause of something and simplifying something to a point where you can understand it and how to deal with it. And when I left, I went to Caesars and I was a director of special investigations there. And thankfully, Richard Casto saw some value in me, and Sue Carletta, unfortunately, she passed away this year, and gave me the shot to prove who I was. And I learned a lot working for that organization, lived and worked in London for a while, and dealt with a lot of the things that happened throughout the organization globally. And then when the pandemic happened, I saw an opportunity because I always wanted to create this consulting company, because emerging businesses, small, medium-sized businesses, don't typically have the funds, the staff, just overall the resources to leverage what the larger companies have. And that's the experience that comes from just doing the type of investigations, the type of reviews, the type of oversight that I have had to do all my career. And I spent, since the early 2000s, curating a contact list of people that I've worked with. And while Pinnacle Consulting right now, we have 5 people working with us, and they all come from varying backgrounds. All of the people that work with me are 20 plus years worth of experience in the fields that are their specialties. And then I have somewhere around 15 to 20 other people that I can pull in for particular projects. So that's the game plan when I started Pinnacle back in 2020. And of course, it would be me that would start a business up at the beginning of a pandemic. So if I had a crystal ball, I probably would have timed things a little bit better. But, that's just the nature of my business. And the reality is I would love to be preventative. And that's why I wanted to come to the show, is because a preventative approach to trying to figure out risk for your organization, for your business model, is going to save you money and save you so many headaches later on down the road. And it's cheaper. The reality of how business works, quite honestly, is my phone calls are, my house is on fire. How do I make the house fire stop? And how do I keep it from spreading to the rest of the building? So it's always 9 times out of 10, chaos and uncertainty, which is something I'm used to. And all the people that I surround myself with are used to operating in, calming things down and getting things kind of slowed down to a point we can understand what happened. And then let's dive into it. So
Mhm.
I know the topic today is preventing pandemic fraud, but the one thing I want to make sure is clear is fraud is an ever-present being that exerts pressure on businesses and individuals. And it just becomes worse when there are things like a pandemic. You go back to natural disasters, like the one that popped into my head was Hurricane Katrina. A lot
Mhm.
of things changed that changed the way fraud had an ability to put hooks into a situation and steal money, misappropriate funds. And then you have the 2008 market crash with the housing. And that created its own set of problems. And this pandemic is no different than that, with the exception that what it did is it forced globally a change in the way businesses had to operate. And a
Mhm.
lot of folks found themselves in situations, how do I work remote? Now, I'm lucky, my
Mhm.
business and the people that work for me, we're built to work remotely. We're built to come to your office, to your location, and kind of help figure out the forest for the trees. But there's other businesses that aren't built that way, have never thought about operating in a largely or a 100% remote capacity. So they implement working from home. Then they're mixing bring your own device with company security policies. And those kind of collisions create opportunities for breaches to come into your network at your business. Now, I'm not an IT professional. I have business partners with me that are IT professionals. But one of the things that I can recognize is when there's a gap in an IT policy, cybersecurity policy. And that's a very important thing to talk about, because one thing the pandemic has brought along is a rise in the exposure of people online, of businesses
Mhm.
online, the number of different ways that people are communicating and trying to do business that fraudsters can take advantage of. And anything
Mhm.
from mining social media networks to learn who works where and learn their title, potentially spoof an email address to get some additional information. And that helps them learn passwords.
Mhm.
Sometimes there are public private key encryptions. And like with a cryptocurrency, your private key, you have to take particular care of that private key. It's the same thing if your company issues you a VPN with a private key. How do you store it? What are the policies for storing that key? So, understanding from a business management perspective, what are the things I now have to pay attention to? Anybody who's small, I mean, I'm small, it's a small business, so it's pretty easy for me to pay attention to all the day to day operations. But as a business grows, you end up having to put people in positions, and they either may not be the best choice, or they could get to a situation in their life where it becomes tempting to do something that is fraudulent. And without you having oversight, and I'll say this a number of different times, a QMS, a quality management system, makes a huge amount of sense for a business. And the sooner you design one and operate, the cheaper it is for you, and how your business model can get used to it and grow with it as it matures. And we can get into that a little bit later. But you pay attention to those particular things. And if you don't, bad things happen. And this was a pre-pandemic situation, but one was a workers' comp director moved on. And when we came in and looked at the track record of what was going on, we came up with a short list of employees that we couldn't identify. And when we looked into it a little bit further, they were all fraudulent employees that were having fraudulent workers' comp claims, and he was buying personal items for his family. And the CEO of that particular company was unaware of it. And it was just that he grew fast, put people in a position, and he was happy that that sat out there. He didn't have to pay attention to it anymore. But those type of exposures you're not aware of until something bad happens. What the pandemic has done is magnify situations like that to an extreme. And you've
Mhm.
got a short staff, you've got people working from home with a large sense of how do I facilitate them doing their normal business. Maybe these employees never had to deal with billing. invoicing. And you could get into a situation where you have duplicate invoices come in for the same project. How do you verify work being done? There's plenty of times where someone can say that they delivered a product and it's actually not there, and you pay them and you never got what you were supposed to get. But because of some breakdown in communication or understanding of who owns that process, those things happen. It happened to us where I received a check from a client and didn't understand where it came from. And I had to do a little bit of communication with them to find out it was just a situation where paths crossed in their organization and they sent out double checks to me. And me being who I am, returning the check to them is part of it. But in other circumstances, you may have a situation where an employee decides to not disclose that and could potentially siphon off that particular double check into his own pocket or her own pocket. And if you don't have the right protocols in place, if you don't have the right things that are established and everyone knows how they're supposed to report, that you wouldn't have the flag pop up and you would never find out about it until there's an audit at some point, maybe an IRS audit. If you're working for the federal government, they do particular spot checks on your organization to make sure the accounting, amongst other things, is aligned with best practice and the points of the contract. And I don't want to see anybody caught in that situation. Those situations are the norm for me. I show up, we figure out how it happened, and then we have to work from a situation of mitigation. How do we mitigate what's happening with the problem we identified? Sometimes there's a regulatory body that wants to put a sledgehammer down on top of your business operations. Other times it's a third party with a particular lawsuit trying to claw money back or claw operations or employees or product back because of a breakdown in how things are delivered. And what the pandemic really did was just exaggerate those holes in the way companies have traditionally done business because of the change to remote, because of the expansion of governmental oversight and regulators coming into a facility. With COVID, there was a lot more kind of disconnected communication from the regulatory bodies. One week you get one direction, the next week you have another direction. And some companies realized real quick that if they had a written health and safety plan, they didn't have something called a pandemic plan, or something that put ownership on somebody within the risk department, usually the health manager who they might delegate to pay attention to certain types of things like a public health crisis. Because while a pandemic is global, there are times where a local health district might have a certain event that will require you to operate differently in that jurisdiction because of a local event regarding some sort of disease or public safety.
So real quick, because there's a lot of stuff coming at you guys, and a lot of information. So I know you guys are going to have questions. So I do want to remind everybody that we are live. And if you put a question in the comments section, we can answer it live. Now, Joel, at the beginning, I believe you said before Pinnacle, you were in law enforcement?
I was.
Or security? Yes, law enforcement. All right, awesome. So protecting people is in your blood. It's all what you're all about. So you are definitely the guy that we should be talking to. And just trying to sum up the beginning here, natural disasters and an event is one trigger to this snowball of what can potentially happen to you in the fraud department. So we've covered like pandemics, natural disasters. What are some other events that people should be looking out for?
Bankruptcy is another one that can rise its head, because during a bankruptcy, or in some sense a merger of companies, is kind of the same, because all of your employees are aware of what's happening, and there's a lot of uncertainty amongst the employees on how far they should push things. Maybe they'd be a little more aggressive in one aspect if there wasn't a merger or a bankruptcy going on. And now with this, it shuts a lot of people down. And if anybody's been with a business who has been going through a bankruptcy or going through a merger, there's that period of almost purgatory where everyone
Mhm.
is at waiting for the final date to close, either for the bankruptcy uh, or a merger, that will allow them to, number one, know, do I still have a job? And
Mhm.
number two, how am I supposed to operate? Uh, do I still file this document with that person? Because that person may not be there anymore. And those same kind of mechanics that break down during a pandemic, who you used to report to is no longer the person you report to anymore. And sometimes you may not even know your old boss is gone.
Mhm.
They're just off into the wind. And then you
Mhm.
find out because you're sending multiple emails, not getting a response. And
Mhm.
so paying attention to how the environment that your employees are existing in and understanding how that puts pressures on them is a big part of understanding risk for your organization. Because in a normal world, your employees should understand how they deal with government regulators, if that's their job, how
Mhm.
they report uh, accounting or invoicing problems, how they deal with potentials for bribery, how
Mhm.
in either direction, one way or the other in their role, and how they feel empowered to kind of do their job. And when those things start falling away or become unclear, it kind of allows a thought process in some people that who wouldn't normally be in that realm to think, all right,
Mhm.
well, no one's really watching me, no one really cares, I'm going to try this. And then they
Yep.
might sit back and watch and go, all right, that guy got away with that, let's try something a little
Yeah.
bit different.
Yeah.
And unless you have the right stuff overlaid to pay attention
Mhm.
to the red flags, you're not going to notice it. And
Mhm.
it although I know I'm kind of repeating myself when it comes down to the mechanisms of fraud,
Mhm.
but folks have to understand the pandemic is just another hiccup in the cost of
Mhm.
doing business, and all
Yeah.
it did was expose more areas of vulnerability that you need
Mhm.
to address. And some of these things are going to be coming out for years to come. Some,
Mhm.
once they get back into full operations, their compliance team might be back, their investigative team might be back, and they start looking at
Mhm.
how things operated the last couple of 2 or 3 years. They're gonna identify things that are issues that they're gonna have to deal with.
Yeah,
But
and let's unpack that real quick. So, like, the pandemic is definitely a situation, and you have to think about the mindset of employees. They're probably thinking, "I've been here for 30 years, my blood, sweat, and tears. I deserve this." You know what I mean? I'm going to put this paperwork, and I deserve this. Plus, they're also getting incentives to, get pandemic relief and COVID relief funds and stuff like that, and free money here and there. So like their mindset is like, the common mindset of employees, like I deserve this. Like, so like they might even think they're not doing something horribly wrong. So, we if you go to any website, you'll see frequently asked questions, right? My
right.
question to you is, are there any frequently occurring situations that are happening that an employer should look out for? Obviously, the pandemic is definitely one of them. But what are some tail signs or some situations that commonly occur that you see?
Inventory control and supply
Hmm.
chain restrictions and delays have caused almost a level of theft and bribery, for lack of a
Hmm.
better term. I'm being overbroad in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, because a container that sits on a ship for X amount of days and eventually comes to get offloaded and then sits at a facility because no one can deliver it. There's so many breakdowns that it invites the reality that somebody can come up and say, hey, look, I know you're supposed to deliver that to team A, but
Hmm.
here's a little money for you, deliver it to me instead, and just tell them it never showed up. And
Wow.
those types of supply chain issues
Hmm.
that come up, and that spreads into who your vendors are. If
Hmm.
you're in a business where you have a sole source vendor, well, let's say
Hmm.
you're in catering and you have one company that delivers the linen. That's it.
Hmm.
That's their job. Have
Hmm.
you evaluated whether or not they're able to deliver on time and the amounts that have been traditionally used by you that might be increasing as things come back to more of a normal business market? If you
Hmm.
haven't, that's a huge risk environment for you to be in, because they could be in that situation where they were team A supposed to get that delivery, but someone else paid out. It could be someone internal in their organization that says, well, I'm not going to give that to this past client because I can double sell it off to somebody else and pocket that money for myself and just tell my boss I don't know what happened to it. So those types of things are becoming a lot more common just because of those gaps and those stresses for people to perform and make deals close, and to a certain extent, employees trying to look out for themselves. I'm not getting paid enough. I never used to have to do 12 jobs. Now I'm doing 12 with the same pay. So maybe I'm going to supplement my income by doing these other things. Those situations happened before the pandemic. They're more prevalent now. They're going to continue to happen after the pandemic. The reality is, if you don't have a QMS minimally and spend the time to pay attention to the fine points of your business and understand what types of data you need to collect to identify those flags, those things are going to happen and you're letting money walk out the door. Let alone you're affecting your reputation as a company, because now if you have somebody paying a bribe or accepting a bribe, that spreads like wildfire throughout the community. And then other folks are going to not do business with you if they can, because they don't want to have to pay a contract plus a under the table payment just to get the business. And that boils down to having a clear-cut ethics plan, a code of conduct for your business that everyone's aware of, FCPA, which is Foreign Corrupt Practices Act for the U.S., Canada, EU, different countries have bribery laws and bribery regulations related to operating businesses. It's largely public companies that need to worry about that on the day-to-day, but private companies have the responsibility to pay attention to that behavior as well. So as things spread, you might be looking outside of your normal supply chain. I've never bought from Korea before, but I need to now, so I have the supplies. What due diligence have you done with your vendor to identify, are any of the things coming from them North Korean? For the sake of an argument, because North Korea is on a ban list.
So let me real quick. Sorry to interrupt you, but that's a great point right there. Now, is there something like, I'll give you an example. Is there like a ABC certification that you should be looking for from a vendor that has, that like basically is giving this compliance? So like they're ABC certified, which means that they are not doing the under the table bribes. They're certified. Like, is there something that the employee or employer or the contractor can look for that gives them peace of mind when dealing with these vendors?
Largely certifications, you can buy them. They're bragging rights. They're things that you can plop on the bottom of your website. And for the large sense, if you don't understand what that certification is, you're going to want to take a look at it, understand, because there are some certifications where they do an independent verification of what they're certifying. So there are quality certifications, but be careful falling prey to, they have certification 2. That's fantastic. You don't understand what it is. It's meaningless. The reality is, having a good compliance program that has parameters for when you're going to engage a background or a due diligence review, and hire somebody, either train people internally or hire a valid investigative company who can take a look at that vendor and give you a report that lets you make a good business decision. An example, there was a large company that was doing a joint venture with another company. And this one of the companies, they'd both been in business a long time, but the other one that was trying to enter the market, been in business since the 1930s. And so everyone thought everything was good. They had a lot of subsidiaries everywhere. And when we did the background investigation, we found out that this company was debarred from the United Nations for some activity, and that some other subsidiaries had bribery investigations in a couple of different states in the United States to just do business and trying to get licensing through some of the government channels. We were still able to do the the business deal, but now the attorneys and the people that are writing the contracts could write things from a standpoint of, let's protect one entity from what we know are some of the problems that could arise from this other entity, and then we can get some assurances back and forth, and it still happened. But the reality is, if they didn't do that investigation, they would have just done a gentleman's handshake and said, "Nice, how's it going?" And then at some
Mhm.
point down the line, your risk is high because of the track record over the past 80 years of that company to put
Mhm.
themselves in a bad situation that you, as the person coming in to do for a joint venture, would end up wearing. And
Mhm.
if you don't know that, huge risk. Those
Yeah.
types of things now in the pandemic with businesses spinning up, do your bit to understand who you're hiring. I
Mhm.
mean, I started in February of 20, and someone who's going to hire me, I would tell you, look into my background, look at my
Mhm.
company, look at who we're bringing to the table, and verify the things that we have, so you have peace of mind on what you're spending. It's not okay in my mind to just hire somebody without taking a look to some component over whether or not you're being told the truth, that you have faith in
Mhm.
their past practices, maybe their associations. There could be anything from a regulatory need for those backgrounds to just good
Mhm.
business practice, and understanding the difference between those two types of background investigations is key for your business. It's also key for the people you're hiring or employing internally to understand to do those backgrounds, because doing a bad background investigation is almost worse than doing nothing at all.
Mhm. Yeah. And these people that you're hiring are representing your business. So whatever they do, it's what you're doing. The
Yeah,
fingers point at you. You're all the same family. So not only is it good so because you're protecting the back end on making sure your payment solutions are going the right way and they're doing things the right way in house, but they also represent you outside in PR world, and they
right.
whatever they do falls in your lap.
Yeah, probably the best way I get the message out is stories. Uh, I
Mhm.
mean, I could talk about stacks of policies or talk about how you manage these things, and I mean,
Mhm.
you'll have a bunch of people falling asleep on the keyboard listening to that stuff. The reality
Uh-huh.
is they have to exist, and they have to be managed, and there's people that have to care about it. And either you spend quality time understanding that so it's efficient, or you waste a
Mhm.
lot of money managing a crisis later on and then having to implement something. A good
Mhm.
example of the pandemic kind of exposed that was more broad than not is a COOP, a continuity of operations plan. And
Mhm.
simple things that happen every day happened before the pandemic would be, you're at the restaurant and your point of sale system goes down.
Mhm.
A coup for that would be, how do we operate manually now? Does everyone know how to operate manually so you can still do
Mhm.
business? And
Mhm.
without that, you have that everyone running into each other, trying to figure out what to do. Someone doesn't have cash, but all they have is a credit card, and you
Mhm.
have all these um, delays and the kitchen gets behind because now you
Yeah.
pulled people out to figure out what to do.
Mhm.
Designing a continuity of operations plan is key, especially if you're dealing with supply chain and vendors. You're going to have stresses on your drivers. You're going to have stresses on supply that comes in. You're going to have power go out because maybe a natural disaster happens, and you can't get into a particular building. You may not be able to use some of the devices to load some of the equipment. What's
Mhm.
the workaround? How do you operate? And everyone needs to understand that and know. And so while it's good, you should be
Mhm.
understanding how you operate when it's not. And that's probably the one thing I saw that I would put at number one that the pandemic exposed, was
Mhm.
that a large number of companies, a large number of risk people in the
Mhm.
government and private practice didn't pay attention to their jobs in the sense of envisioning potential crisis, building out a framework of how we should probably deal with it if it happens, and at least be able to have something in hand when the chips are on the table, to use a Vegas term. But the reality was, everyone who had that job to anticipate these things, they just weren't. I can't tell you the number of conversations I had either with companies or government officials where one conversation I had was in Nevada. There's no
Mhm.
state law that identifies an essential service. It's up to the governor's office to identify who those are. It's up to the health
Mhm.
district to help identify who those are. And when this
Mhm.
all happened, I made a couple of phone calls and I said, "Hey, look, I've got some clients. We're trying to build up this COVID plan, which
Mhm.
I need a little help with. Just tell me if you have any guidance on what's going to be an essential service or not." And I couldn't get a straight answer. And that was shocking to me that there
Mhm.
was some people would say that you needed to have money from tax payrolls to be an essential service, to where I would answer back, well, you've got hotels, you've got grocery stores, you've got pharmaceuticals, you've got all these particular things that don't get money from tax payrolls, but they're still essential because of the services they deliver. So there was that disconnect, and a lot of companies
Mhm.
fell prey to that. Every health and safety program we've been looking at so far doesn't have a pandemic section as part of it. They're not
Mhm.
long, they're pretty short, but what it does is it lays ownership to a particular person within your structure to pay attention to what's happening locally and globally. It takes them 5 minutes to understand what's happening, but then also make a plan. In the
Mhm.
pandemic realm, the CDC, like them or hate them, it's kind of irrelevant. They have an influenza like illness protocol that sits on their website. It's a framework that they put out for other people to use that says, look, in the event that there's an influenza like illness, either globally or locally, this is the anticipated way we're going to handle it.
Mhm.
You'd be surprised how many people weren't aware that the CDC has it on their website. And these are people that are in risk, and these are people that are in the health uh, regulatory business. So it was kind of eye-opening to me because I would have expected, and
Mhm.
me being 52, you would think I'd stop being surprised. The reality is, you never stop learning. You never stop expanding your knowledge. You never stop building out more
Mhm.
tools for your tool belt. And I think some people just did. Uh, and that's kind of the reality we're in is companies are looking back going, we don't have a COOP plan.
Yeah.
Our health and safety plan hasn't been refreshed in 10 years. Our
Mhm.
compliance plan is dated. It references regulatory requirements that don't even apply anymore. Or we're not
Mhm.
even in that space anymore. Do we even have to pay attention to those regulatory requirements? So uh, there's a lot of that going on in the business
Mhm.
world right now because as things start to spin up, now they're looking kind of at the last couple of years like a time they want to forget. And
Mhm.
I understand that. It was very painful, stressful last couple of years, and it's going to continue
Mhm.
for a little while longer with some uncertainty. But to forget the last couple of years and just move on like it didn't happen is doing a huge disservice because chances are there's going to be another event of some sort that's going to stress your business. And it could be bankruptcy, like we said, it could be a natural disaster, it could be another pandemic. I hope
Mhm.
not. But the reality is we have to prepare for these things in our line of work. And quite honestly, a large number of people just weren't paying it due attention.
Yeah, and so, the one key thing I want to address with your story is plan and preparation. I deal with another business that's similar mindset as you because they are in law enforcement. They're called P3, and they help civilians prepare for disastrous situations, like when an active shooter or something. And Master Phil is another one who works with them as well, who's always teaching people self defense. Be prepared. Have a plan if XYZ goes down. It might not be likely that it happens, but you have a plan. Just like you said, the POS system goes down, the employees, they're going to just give up on the day. Up, I guess we're not having the restaurant today. And they're
Right,
just going to, like, the whole thing goes down. But if you have a plan, everything can work smoothly as if something didn't happen at all, right? So
right.
definitely having a plan rings true. I do want to remind you guys that we are live. So if you have a question, please put it in the comments section. We can answer it live today. So, one common theme is to have a plan and to make sure you're prepared for these situations. So like, what would be some of the first steps? So that like we just provide you guys with information. Now this is on your radar and someone wants to make sure this doesn't happen to them. What are some preliminary steps or things that our viewers can do to get them started to be prepared?
I think first off, it's really obvious that I operate a business that offers these particular services. The reality is, I don't have to invent reasons for people to need me. I just hope they know of me when things happen, or that they know other credible people. Because the reality is, there are some other folks out there that do really, really good, solid work, and that companies have really solid, dedicated employees internally that have either done this job before, or since the pandemic has shown up on their plate, they might need a little help with learning. The truth of the matter is, if you're going to get into it and you don't have somebody internally that's comfortable with making those assessments, then you have two choices. You're going to try and source and hire a full-time employee to come into your business to run these operations, or you're going to look for a third party. And in either sense, you have pitfalls, because you're going to want to identify who am I bringing in, which would be a background. You're going to take a look at them. So you make sure that whoever's doing the background on the full-time employee you're bringing in is who they say. Because another story, there was a head of compliance that, if they had bothered to look, had a track record of going to a company for a short period of time, having a compliance crisis, and then exiting the company during the middle or right at the end of the compliance crisis, and leaving the company holding a bag of shredded paper, and they go off to the next company. And they had that ongoing cycle. And if they had evaluated that, I would like to have thought they wouldn't probably have put that person in that role, but they did, and that caused that problem. The same thing with, you're going to come to a third party and look for that information. Like I mentioned, if you're going to hire me, you should look at me. You should do your own kind of digging and verify some of the things about who I say I am and what we can do, because that gives you a little bit of faith. And then make sure that your contracts are written, whether it's an employment contract or a contract with a third party, that protects both parts. And you're going to want to make sure that you follow through on components of that contract. Had another client that hired an executive with the contract that said they were going to do a background, and they never did a background. And once they started working with them, they started realizing issues. The job description didn't give them much help, and the contract put them in a bad situation to where the background was irrelevant anymore. And kind of the cart before the horse there. So for a company to first go out and find someone to talk to, if they don't already understand what they're supposed to be doing, is going to be key, and find the right person. I've always steered away from people that are trying to constantly sell me things. It's just who I am. And when someone comes down and talks to me, here's my business, here are the things we're doing, these are the problems we're seeing, can you help? We'll sit down, have a conversation. I might say, you need these three things. You need a code of business conduct, you need a compliance program, and you need to refresh your health and safety policy and program. You don't have to do any of them. You could pick one or all three. And that's the reality when you come down to it, is having a company that will help you identify, or an employee that will identify priorities. Which one is going to be the one that's going to set fire to things first? And which one should we pay attention to first? And these are expensive things if you let them go on for a long period of time. There's budget concerns, especially now. And the reality is, we've got to be creative. So if a company comes to me and I give them a quote of, let's say, I'm going to use round numbers, $100,000 for all three of those things you need. And they say, look, we don't have a budget for that anymore. We took it shorts the last couple of years with the pandemic. And I appreciate that. How about let's sit down and figure out what's a priority? I would say refreshing your HS&E, and then putting out the compliance, and then maybe the code of conduct and those particular things. Okay. Do you have anybody in-house that we could train up because then you would pay someone like us, train those people internally to do that hand holding so they can build it, save a lot of money, and we can work out within a budget that's going to make the company successful. Because if I make $100,000 and all that I succeed in, Doug, is putting you out of business because you go broke paying me $100,000, I've done no good for anybody.
Yep.
And that's the reality where we're at. Back before the pandemic, there wouldn't be much of an argument about money. It still happened, and you would always work out ways. But we've got to be more creative now because a lot of folks are struggling. Some people are trying to start businesses, and businesses that have been around for a long time saw huge hits to revenue that came in. And so they need to fix things. They may not have the disposable budget to do them all right now.
And when they don't have the budget to do it right now, they think they could take it on themselves, which is a huge disservice because you're the expert and you know all the tips and tricks and what they should be doing. They try to take it on themselves, which in turn they are not putting the proper time in the extra and the business, which they should be paying attention to. So it's way smarter. We deal with it here. So like, we run a social media agency, production, marketing studio, and like anyone can hit the post button on social media, but we have tips, tricks, and ways on the back end to make them more successful quicker and to do things that way. It's the same thing with you. They could do their research and get their files and fill out the paperwork themselves, but it's way better to have an expert do it the right way the first time, and they can actually focus on the business.
The reality is all these programs everyone wants to think of them as ink on paper, and they are, or they're ink in the cloud in some PDF on a drive somewhere. The reality is all of these things are living, breathing programs, and they have to be managed. And understanding how to manage them takes time. And I'm glad you pointed that out, Doug, because you could go to Google, you can search samples of this and samples of that. But the reality is, in most cases, you don't have the real world experience to understand. While that's a framework, it doesn't match with the standards where I'm at. And then the second thing is you're taking away from, you're trying to bring in capital by bringing in additional clients. And then the third thing would be, I'm not even sure if what I'm designing is aligned with the way I operate. And how do we assess that? And those are some of the things that we look at when we come in and write these policies from a program standpoint, is we're going to give you something and you're going to operate it. You're going to manage it. And you're going to find things by driving that car that work great and things that don't. And how do you adjust them? How do you, as a living document, we tried this, it doesn't work for a business model. The safety meetings have to be held differently. And how do we document those? The way it's written down doesn't work. So like with a background that's done wrong is worse than doing no background at all. Writing some of these programs and not managing them and not curating them into a living, breathing thing is almost worse than not having them at all. So those are the risks that you get into when you try and self-engineer. You're stealing your time, and then you may not be placing the best thing for your business.
Time is your greatest asset. And instead of having a professional do it the right way, and you're trying to do it, which is taking time away from your business and preventing you from growing. So, it's just in a lot of situations and occupations, not just yours, there's a lot of time where people just try to take it on themselves. But they should have a professional do it because they have the expertise, the experience. They know what works, what doesn't work. It would save them a tremendous amount of time, which in turn they can use that time to focus on their business.
Right. There's no harm in calling at me for sure. I know there's several other folks that I could probably come off the top of my head with that are the same, but calling and talking to me doesn't cost you anything. Sending me an email, I can give you some guidance that might send you away with a little bit of feeling in the right direction. And I've done a service. And because like I said, I don't have to invent reasons for people to need me. They're going to hire me or they're not. And when it comes down to it, my goal is to try and make companies avoid pitfalls. And if
Mhm.
they're in the middle of something chaotic, how do they get out of it? With little to
Mhm.
no impact to the way they do business. Maybe we can mitigate things away. Some of the
Mhm.
OSHA violations that come in. Sometimes the regulator, that the inspector that shows up, cites the wrong memo, lack of a better
Mhm.
term. And unless you do an investigation and look at how the information flowed in, how you've trained your staff, and you have those records in place, you might be able to. And we were successful in one I can think off the top of my head in getting
Mhm.
one thrown out because it was citing a defunct guidance memo from a couple of weeks prior. And
Mhm.
they were just, their inspector hadn't got up to speed with where the organization for OSHA's was in the beginning. So those types of things and paying attention to the fine points are
Mhm.
really important in a regulatory mess. I posted something a while ago. There was some news article about a roofing contractor in Florida that's on the hook for over $2 million in OSHA fines, and they're
Wow.
trying to seek jail time for him. And I read the article, and he spoke about he was blown away by the amount of the fines, didn't want to deal with it, didn't know how to deal with it, so he threw it in a drawer and just kept ignoring it. And
Uh-huh.
now he's in that situation, and it's sad to see that happen
Mhm.
because it doesn't have to happen that way.
Mhm.
Regulators, if you have a relationship with them, if you are showing engagement, it really bodes well for your company because they're going to see you're trying. If you don't try, they're going to try and rake you over the coals. But if you come in and say, hey, look, we have a quality management system, we have our
Mhm.
health and safety that we refresh every so many years, and here's a documented trail of that. And we've
Mhm.
done our investigation, identified, yeah, you're right. There's a gap here that we had to fix, and here's our corrective action on what we fixed. There's a very good chance you're going to have an ability to mitigate what fine that they're trying to levy against you because you're showing engagement in not only your company's operating procedures, but with the regulatory body charged with overseeing what you're dealing with. And,
Mhm.
and there are any number of stories I can keep throwing out to you that the pandemic has just brought the microscope onto and expand the number of ways that people can take advantage and that companies can be taken advantage of because just accepting a show cause or a fine from a regulatory body, 9 times out of 10 isn't the right answer. Let's take a look
Mhm.
at it. What are they actually alleging? What are the components of where we're at? And how can we put these things together and make a decision of whether or not we're
Mhm.
going to have an argument with regulators about this or not? And having
Mhm.
that dialogue with them before the crisis happens is key. And very successful experiences I've had with pretty much all the regulators in this country and others. If you have that dialogue when things are good, when
Mhm.
things go bad, that dialogue still exists, and you can
Yep.
sometimes get uh, through a different door just
Mhm.
because you've shown that engagement.
Yeah. So if someone wanted to start the dialogue with you and wanted to, get that free consultation and have that chat with you, are there some things that they should get together or get prepared to present to you? Are there certain files, forms, numbers? Is there anything they should be prepared to have before even speaking to you, to present to you, if you will?
It's high level, top topic needs of what they're thinking when it gets
Mhm.
down to it. I wouldn't want to have anybody start compiling records or pulling reports because the
Mhm.
reality is once we talk, if we agree
Mhm.
that, hey, look, we want to go down path A,
Mhm.
that they might have just wasted a whole bunch of time because they pulled wrong reports, or
Yeah.
maybe their systems aren't, and this happens quite often too, they're
Mhm.
not cataloging the right kind of data so things can be done.
Mhm.
Like an FTE evaluation, full-time equivalent evaluation. You can do it
Mhm.
as an FTE evaluation or an hourly evaluation. Depending on the business model you have, sometimes one is better than the other, but especially now because there's been such turnover in the level of employment with the company, either through pandemic, people moving on,
Mhm.
shrinkage and expansion, whatever it can be. When was the last time you evaluated your company from a standpoint of efficiency? Do I have the right number of people in the right place so all of these things work? Or do I have too many? Maybe I'm wasting money on staff.
Hmm.
Those types of reality, I would probably suggest at this point now that the the likelihood that most companies are in a situation where they're looking at, I've got too many employees versus too little, I think it's the
Hmm.
opposite. And then maybe through that evaluation, you can figure out I've given the responsibility of task A to the wrong person. They're
Hmm.
not suited from experience level. It'd be better for me to give it to employee B because they have that background. And you can make things more efficient by understanding what everyone's roles are and what they've been
Hmm.
shouldered with since this pandemic's happened, and potentially make yourselves a little more efficient, which is the key.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. A lot of great information. We dove into a lot of awesome stuff. You probably maybe even said it before in this episode. But as we're coming, wrapping up, like are there's like 2 or 3 tips that the people at home can implement today that you would like to share?
Take a moment and look at what your business is and how it operates, and understand the risk components of where you're at. Are
Hmm.
you in a situation where you're solely relying on a third party to make your name look good? And if you are, what have you done to understand the reliability of that third party, especially now during
Hmm.
this pandemic? And then take a look at what your employees are doing. Are they doing the same things? Are they doing more? And especially pay attention to things that pop up, things that you used to do, things that you
Hmm.
used to have your fingers into as an executive that you
Hmm.
don't anymore because you've hired someone else to take it off your shelf. Understand what they're doing, and get an idea of how you've been keeping track of the high level stuff that they do. If the
Hmm.
answer is, well, they're there and I haven't heard anything, no news is good news, that
Hmm.
should be a flag to you, in the sense of, I'm not saying they're a bad employee or they're a thief, but the
Hmm.
reality is, as an executive, you want to pay attention to the high level stuff of all the components that are going to affect your reputational standing in the community where you're at, and then
Hmm.
the ability for you to have cash inflow that's correct versus someone skimming some money off the top to try and
Hmm.
make ends meet. So that'd be my biggest thing, is take a look at how you're operating now,
Hmm.
identify gaps in where you have knowledge of how the things are operating. Not telling
Hmm.
anyone to micromanage. I'm the complete opposite of a micromanager.
Hmm.
But there's still, I mean, my company, there are only 5 of us. We have a QMS. We have
Hmm.
a written security policy. Both of our locations where we work at, we do CPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design. We take a look at the parking lots and the setups and ingress and egress, and understand how things kind of work for these areas. And that's just something we wanted to get used to, because as we grow, hopefully, knock wood,
Yeah.
as we grow, those things are going to be inherent to the structure that we have, and the people that we'll bring on will just fall into how we generally operate. And much better way of operating, because every time you sit down, you identify the high points of what could be failures, identify failures, and have corrective actions. And you're involved in your business, versus you can get stuck in this path of only trying to drive clients to you, and
Hmm.
you lose track of what's happening once you do the handoff to the rest of your company. And you need to pay attention to some of the high level things that are going to really derail you when things go sideways.
Absolutely. A common thing that business owners think is like that they're going to care about the business as much as they do, and as it's just it's not gonna happen. Sorry to you know what I mean. Like they're going to care about the business, but they care about their job. They're doing the responsibilities, but no one's going to care about the business as much as the business owner. It's their baby, right?
Right.
So you always want to keep an eye on everything. But awesome, Joel, great stuff. I would like to shift gears a little bit, get to know you a little bit as a person. So, how long have you been in LeTip?
I joined in September of 21, and I joined because I saw the benefits of the networking. And I'm business
Hmm.
to business. I don't handle
Hmm.
individual clients.
Mm-hmm.
here or there. And the reality of where I see the benefits for LeTip is that I am in a small group in my chapter
Mm-hmm.
of business owners and business management people, and it's that network that they have that I can be of assistance with.
Mm-hmm.
Attorneys for like litigation checks, and attorneys sometimes need someone who can sit down and look at an HS&E or a security policy or their
Mm-hmm.
training records and tell you if things are up to standards. And then you have the traditional business models. Right now, we have a crypto project that we're
Nice.
working with the city and the state, trying to align anti-money laundering and know your customer platforms with a software solution so they can enter traditional business easier, real estate, hopefully in more regulated things like gaming and potentially other things. But
Awesome.
those are some of the things that we're doing. And I saw that benefit that LeTip had because we're also members, in other organizations, the Chamber of Commerce, and that's just a
Mm-hmm.
different animal. And LeTip brought me almost past the gatekeepers to where I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
to people who are engaged in business. And I've mentioned it before. I don't have to invent reasons for people to need us. Having people know about me when situations happen is what's key. And that's
Yeah.
why I see the value in LeTip. I
Awesome.
don't expect that I would get a lot of LeTip tips from my
Mm-hmm.
chapter because I'm not selling products like, stuff you put on the table or things like that. A
Uh-huh.
handful a year, the benefit is being able to do this and offer a service to the folks who need it. Hopefully,
Mhm.
I can see an uptick in some of the preventative folks who are coming in trying to get things in line so they don't have a crisis later on that's going to cost them
Mhm.
2 to 3 times as much as it would now. But reality of just business, I think, is just that chaos and uncertainty. Risk is generally not a profit driver for the company.
Mhm.
We are risk mitigation. How do we keep a
Yeah.
company out of losing their licenses? And
Mhm.
how do they understand the risk? Because you can go into risky business, you can accept a certain amount of risk, but to do it blindly, I would say would be
Yeah.
bad choice.
Yes, absolutely. Good stuff. Awesome. So how about you personally? Any hobbies? Any things besides work that you're interested in nowadays?
Everyone always laughs when I say this, but if I hadn't been a cop, I probably would have been a cook because my wife
Nice.
and I were married in Calistoga, in
Mhm.
California back in '97 at a winery, and I cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The more complicated the meal, the more relaxing it is for me.
Mhm.
And while now, as I've gotten older, standing up for long periods of time is kind of not fun anymore because I've not been good to my body with the things I've done. But that's just it. I love the complicated meals, and
Awesome.
presentation has always been a challenge for me. So finding out different ways to make it uh, pop and look interesting is a lot of fun.
Awesome. What's your favorite dish?
Well, mine would have to be osobuco during the
All right.
winter, and then paella in the spring, and then summertime. I only do raw wood cooking, so I barbecue and smoke the longer, like a pork butt or a brisket, 14, 16 hours. Get up at 3 in the morning to start that. I just love that whole process. One of these days, I'd like to kind of cheat and buy maybe something like a Traeger that does it automatically for you. But to me,
Wow.
I like the old school, having a half a cord of wood and just kind of burning that out through the summer, making different dishes.
Nice. Very good. Are you a sport guy? Any favorite teams you got?
Green Bay Packer fan, which is kind of funny because I'm
Yeah.
not from Wisconsin, but
Okay.
my grandfather was welding ships in World War II in San Francisco, and I grew up watching the 49ers with him. And I
Mhm.
was always watching the Packers second to that, and I just kind of
Mhm.
followed them through. And then when I had both my kids and was able to get back into football, just kind of fell back into enjoying watching them. And
Nice.
other than that, of course, my second team, Raiders, because we're here in Vegas. And
Mhm.
I never appreciated hockey. I had a roommate when I was in the police academy, and he tried to explain hockey to me. And thank goodness the Knights are here, because I'm starting to understand a little bit more, because I love
Yeah.
watching them play.
Oh yeah, the Knights are great to watch. Yeah, you just put the puck in the net. That's pretty much it.
It's so
But
much easier to
so
watch in person.
yeah. So I'm sorry that the Green Bay got eliminated, but do you have a Super Bowl pick? Do you have a team that you think is going to win this year?
Oh, well, I really like Patrick Mahomes
Mhm.
and the Chiefs. I like their personality. I like the way they play. So I'd kind of like to see them go. And honestly, the Bills would be after that when it
Yeah,
comes to it. I just kind of like, for the same reasons,
yeah.
their
Very
drive and
similar
the way they
teams.
play.
Yeah. I mean, they went into overtime. Very similar teams, and they were going back and forth. Probably one of the great games of this generation.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So, any other things that you want to share with the people at home?
No, I just hope everyone stays safe. Hopefully, we get out of this mess. My daughter had a COVID incident going back to her dorm, and so we
Mhm.
just self isolated. Our company, we're all vaccinated, and my whole family is, and everything like that. And no one else ended up testing positive for it after 5 days and a couple of different tests. So we escaped that. I was
Mhm.
able to shift to remote work
Mhm.
exclusively during those couple of days to get things done. Uh, but we got through that. So 2 years, luckily, without that scare, and that was the one we had. We've had some family members pass away, and some other things happen with the COVID mess. But I just want to see everyone get out of this, and we can move on with the normalcy to some degree.
Absolutely. So if someone was looking to contact you, is there a website or email address we could tell them to get in contact with you and reach out to you?
Yep. So the phone number is 702-508-3669. And the email, did you say something, Doug? There you go.
Oh, he's putting it up for you. There you go.
Thank you. The website is pinnacleconsultadvisors.com.
Okay.
And then our general email box is help@thepcadvisors.com.
Cool. Which is all right there at that website. So if you're looking for more information, Joel obviously has a ton of useful information. A lot of it we cover today, but if you want to get a double dose or more information and help, tips or tricks, definitely reach out to Joel. Before even Pinnacle, he was protecting people. Now he's protecting businesses. So it's in his blood. It's what he loves to do. And Joel, thank you so much for providing this information and doing this LeTip live with us today.
Absolutely. And I'll just close with if I'm not asking anybody to do anything more than evaluate how they do business. And if they even just want to call to bounce an idea off me so they can get a sense of, have I hired or do I have the right things in place? Give me a call. It's all about getting people on the right page and making sure things are done to where you have less stress in the
Mhm.
future. And even if I got to point you to somebody else, I'll point you to somebody else that's going to be the better fit for you.
Absolutely. And that's the great thing about LeTip. We're looking out for each other, just like a family, helping each other businesses grow. So I do want to ask you guys at home. So if you know anybody who has some useful information or would like to, help our members and provide some value, please reach out to us and we can get them on a LeTip live. Got some comments. Some are saying Joel is an excellent resource. Thank you, Summer, for tuning in.
Thanks, Summer.
But yeah, that pretty much wraps it up, Joel. So unless you got anything else, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for preparing this presentation and helping us prevent pandemic fraud.
Thank you, Doug.
Have a good day, guys.
Take care.